So, dear colleagues, we shall continue our working day, and we give the floors to the Principal Deputy Chief Monitor, Mr. Alexander Hug.
Good afternoon, dear friends. At first glance, the security situation in Donetsk and Luhansk region has improved. Following the flare-up in Avdiivka and Yasinovata, we saw last week a decrease in the number of ceasefire violations. Here is the graph covering the previous 17 weeks. You can see last week represented a return to the normal, abnormal level of violence. Last week actually saw a 75% decrease in the number of ceasefire violations compared to the previous week. A similar situation prevailed this week. Just yesterday we recorded around 200 ceasefire violations. Compare that with the thousands we have been recording on a daily basis during the flare-up in Avdiivka and Yasinovata, and it is obvious that there has been a sustained period of de-escalation. Dear friends, the fact remains, however, that the full and comprehensive cessation of fire called for by the Trilateral Contact Group on 1st of February and foreseen in the Minsk package of measures signed 2 years ago to this week has not been achieved yet. 200 ceasefire violations are 200 ceasefire violations too many. Every bullet, mortar or artillery round fired can injure or kill. De-escalation means little to someone with shrapnel in his back or a bullet in her leg. In addition, de-escalation can only be seen as a temporary reprieve. We know from experience that violence comes in waves. It will come again and wash over the long-suffering people of Avdiivka and Donetsk and other places along the contact line. This will remain true so long as the sides have heavy weapons along the contact line and so long they maintain positions in close proximity to one another. And despite their claims and despite the fact that they have committed to withdrawing them, the sides still have heavy weapons on the contact line. Last Friday, for instance, we saw 8 self-propelled howitzers in so-called DPR-controlled Kozatske. 4 days earlier, in government-controlled Aslanove, an SMM unmanned aerial vehicle spotted 2 multiple launch rocket systems. Here you can see the MLRS along with a support vehicle on the left. And of course, such weapons are being used. In this video footage here, from our camera near Stanica Luhanska on Wednesday last week, you can actually see a Grad rocket being fired and in flight from south-southeast to north-northwest. Last week, in fact, we observed 94 weapons in violations of agreed respective withdrawal lines. And the proximity that brought the escalation in Avdiivka, Yasinovata, and in many other places before that has not been reversed. In that area and in other areas along the contact line, in some places a mere few hundred meters separates the sites. Dear friends, everyone I talk to here in Kiev, just like everyone I talk to in Luhansk and Donetsk, tells me they want peace. They're sick of this pointless loss of life and destruction. And yet it continues. It continues because the sides are not unwilling, I believe, but incapable of removing the risk factors that underpin the violence. The sides recognize that these risk factors, the presence of heavy weapons and the proximity of positions, lead to violence and sustain violence. Despite this, however, they have not done what needs to be done. The reason is clear: neither side trusts the other. Trust is fragile, and given what has happened over the past 2.5 years, it is no wonder that it has been broken. I suspect for many years after this conflict has been settled, this will still be an issue, one that will require dialogue, patience, and no small amount of forgiveness on all sides. But right here and right now, the sides must overcome this mistrust. At the moment, if they withdraw weapons and disengage, they have no confidence that the other side will do the same. They fear that their compliance will be taken advantage of. Instead of withdrawing weapons and disengaging, the other side will seize the opportunity to make gains. This is exactly why the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission has over 600 monitors in the East. It's why we have ramped up our nighttime monitoring capabilities with the establishment of additional forward patrol bases, the use of static cameras in key locations, and the extensive deployment of unmanned aerial vehicles. We are not just here to monitor and report, we are here to verify. We are here to verify the side's compliance or non-compliance, as the case may be, with their commitments. Basically, our role is to provide the verification to prove to each side that the other has withdrawn weapons, to prove that they have disengaged. The sides have in fact regularly demanded that we provide this verification. Ultimately, they know it is in their own interest. SMM verification is what allows the sides to overcome their mistrust. It provides the confidence that has been lacking for over 2 years now. It is a key to unlocking this conflict. But we cannot do this for 2 reasons. Firstly, the sides have not provided us with updated baseline information on their positions and weapons to be withdrawn. They have promised they would, but they have not. Without it, we cannot verify that weapons are actually being withdrawn and remain withdrawn, or that the sides have actually disengaged. And secondly, and here they have promised too, in every agreement they have signed, the sides must give the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission safe and unimpeded access. They have not. On Sunday, in so-called DPR-controlled Pikuzi, for instance, after observing a camouflage tank, our monitors had to leave the area because someone started firing warning shots in their vicinity. Something similar happened yesterday in Donetsk city. Our monitors were following up on information that there had been an incident on Chekova Street. Armed so-called DPR members denied them access to the street. Ironically, at the same time, there was a DPR orchestrated protest outside our office in the city center, complaining that we were refusing to monitor such security incidents. This kind of restriction of our freedom of movement happened 27 times last week. 24 of those restrictions happened in areas not controlled by the government. And this does not count the number of times our monitors have been unable to patrol and monitor and verify because the sites refused to remove mines and unexploded ordnance, even though they promised they would. Now, dear friends, I am not stressing and insisting on unhindered freedom of movement because it is in our mandate, which expresses the collective will of 57 participating states, including Ukraine and the Russian Federation. Nor necessarily either because the sides have repeatedly signed on the dotted line, committing themselves in providing it. I do so because this is fundamental in bringing this conflict to an end. If there is no access, there is no verification, and without verification, there is no trust, and without trust, the sides, as we have seen, will not withdraw the heavy weapons or disengage. And if the latest de-escalation leads to some people think that this is not of an immediate importance, then they should consider a few facts. The figures showing an overall decrease in ceasefire violations hide an uncomfortable reality. In areas east and northeast of Mariupol, we have recorded a 20% increase in the number of ceasefire violations. The majority of violence there was recorded by the SMM camera near Shirokine during night hours. The camera recorded more than 100 explosions, more than 100 rocket-assisted projectiles, and about 1,700 tracer rounds. And the use of the Grad in Stanica Luhanska last Wednesday, that I mentioned earlier, is also relevant in this respect. Here you can see the Grad in flight in this still shot from the camera. You saw the video earlier. I highlighted the developments northeast of Mariupol and the incident in Stanica Luhanska because they demonstrate the volatility that exists at the contact line. The sudden increase in violence in one place or the use of lethal indiscriminate weapon in an area where it had previously not been tells us one thing. Violence is possible anywhere, anytime, and it will happen unless its root causes, the presence of weapons and proximity of the sites are addressed. Preliminary figures from Donetsk, in fact, underline this dynamic. Listen careful. Last night, our monitors in the city center of Donetsk heard over 400 explosions. On the second anniversary of the signing of the package of measures for the implementation of the Minsk agreements, isn't it time that the sides recognize this fundamental reality? Isn't it time they actually implemented the Minsk agreements and put an end to this conflict? Isn't it time that they stop preventing the OSCE SMM from doing its job? And isn't it time they started allowing us to allow them to stop this violence? As usual, at the end here, I would like to inform you about the latest mission numbers. As of today, the mission has 721 monitors, of whom 603 are deployed in the east. In addition, there are 335 Ukrainian colleagues and 93 other international staff working for the SMM. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hook. Колеги, чи є запитання? Do we have any questions? We don't have. Okay, we have one question. It's going to be in Ukrainian.
Crimean News. Based on the information you recorded the last week, 94 violations of the withdrawal of heavy weapons. It's general on both sides of the line of contact. Can you divide the number of non-withdrawn weapons from each side specifically? And today, in continuation of this question, head of so-called DPR, Mr. Pushilin, we expect that we have withdrawn all the weapons from the line of contact, and we're expecting OSCE SMM to record it. Can you confirm this information?
Thank you. Indeed, I can confirm we have seen 94 weapons in violation of the withdrawal lines last week. And during my presentation, I gave you some examples of weapons on the government side and on the non-government side. And you will find all the other of the 92 that are missing in these cases in our reports on a daily basis, listed under the section in violation of withdrawal lines, and you see those weapons listed in the report. With regard to the statement made by Mr. Pushilin out of Donetsk, I can only but reiterate that the SMM stands ready to verify, but for it to be able to do so, the sites, including the so-called DPR, must provide inventories to the SMM so it can verify that weapons are withdrawn and remain withdrawn. Once we receive this information, we can do that job, but we have not received this information, not in full from the government, not from the so-called DPR, and not from the so-called LPR. Thank you.
We are going to finish here. Thank you, Mr. Hook, and looking forward to seeing you here next week.
Thank you.